Hey everybody, today we're debating how atheism is and should be defined, and we're starting right now. Welcome everybody for this huge event. I am so excited that you are here. This is, I was telling Steve beforehand, this is the bright side of my, the brightest part of my day. So this is going to be a blast. Don't want to take too much time. Want to say just a few things about today's debate and the channel overall. If this is your first time here, we are thrilled to have you here. Whether you're a Christian, atheist, Jedi, or even Sith, we're thrilled to have you here. We want you to feel welcome. And with that, feel free to hit that subscribe button if you enjoy debates on topics like these, as we have a lot more coming up. And hopefully we'll get to have these gentlemen back. This is at least their second time here. They've been here a number of times each, and we're thrilled to have them. We thank them that they chose to hang out with us here and to have this debate here. It's going to be a lot of fun. I want to let you know they're linked in the description. So if you're like, man, I can't get enough of that Steve McRae, you can find his links in the description. Same thing with Patient Beard, my man. That's what Jared PB stands for, is Jared Patient Beard. If you're like, oh snap, that beard, I want to see more of that, you can go down to the description and you can see as much as you like. So with that, also want to mention our friends at the Great Debate Community is, by the way, it's usually, we've been plugging these guys recently, Steve McRae, who you see on the right. If you have not somehow heard of him already, in the online debate world, Steve McRae is actually the founder and leader of the Great Debate Community. So we want to plug them and let you know, if you love debates, that's another spot where you can listen to awesome debates. And we're happy to have you listen to them here, but we're also happy to let you know where else they're happening, so you can decide for yourself where else you can see other debates as well. And so just want to give that quick plug. And in addition to that, we are excited to mention today's debate is going to be not quite a formal debate. It's going to be a quick opening that's flexible from Patient Beard. That's like roughly 5 minutes, and then from there it's really just a civil discourse rather than a debate. We use the word debate loosely, so that civil discourse will just be open discussion. We will have Q&A after, so if you have a question, feel free to put it in the live chat. I will search for it, which it helps me if you put @ModernDayDebate at the start of your question. We'll put it in the list, and then we'll read those during the Q&A. Oh, last, if you happen to have a super chat, what we do is you can make a comment toward one of the debaters as well if you would like, and all of the super chats automatically go to the top of the list for the Q&A. So with that, let's get, I want to give each of our speakers just a quick chance to share what they've been up to at their channel. And so we'll start with Steve McRae, who's actually got 2 channels, or 3, so they're all linked in the description. And so you can, if you want to share, Steve, about what you've been up to at your channels, we're glad to have you here. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks. Yeah, I do have 3 channels, and there's nothing cult-like about your description of me being the leader of the Great Debate Community. Nothing cult-like about that at all. I do own the Great Debate Community. We have migrated from G+ to Facebook now. We are also on MeWe, but not doing much with that at the moment. It's literally not a platform I've got to do much into. But I do have 3 channels. I have the Great Debate Community channel, which is a community channel where people can actually run hangouts on it and do a couple, whatever they want to do on it. It's if they're trusted as a manager, they can run their own hangouts late at night. And then it's kind of the community channel of the Great Debate Community. And I also have my own personal channel, Steve McRae, which is just about up to 10,000 subs. That Team Skeptic and a few other people in the flat earth fighting community are going to help me get to 10 subs hopefully next weekend. We're going to have a sub drive. And then of course I'm the co-host of the Non Sequitur show on the Non Sequitur channel with Kyle Curtis, and everybody's kind of heard of that, I hope, by now. So thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And absolutely, that's another channel where you can see a lot of debates on topics like these, as well as many others, as the Non Sequitur show, again linked in the description. And Patient Beard, we're glad to have you back. He would define atheism as a lack of belief. Just so you know, that's what we have in parentheses next to each of the debaters' names, their position on atheism. So Patient Beard, we're glad to have you. If you'd like to share projects that you've been up to lately, thanks for coming back.
Well, thanks for having me back. I have done many debates on James's channel. One of these days, I will get around to mirroring them onto my channel. But my channel is a hobby. It's not anything I'm trying to monetize or make any kind of business out of. So it does get a little bit neglected from times. And then one of the other things I've been working on in my spare time is a mod for Minecraft for anybody who's into that kind of thing. And that's my intro, short and sweet.
You bet. Well, we're glad to have both of you here, and with that, we will now switch into the opening from Patient Beard, and then we'll have the open discussion. The floor is yours, Patient Beard.
All right. So the topic for today is going to be atheism. And to get started, I wanted to make a quick differentiation between atheism and agnosticism. When we look at the original roots of the word, theism means with God, and atheism inverts that to mean without God. When we look at the root word for Gnosticism, it means knowledge. And then when we add the A in front of that for agnosticism, it means without knowledge. So those are two different claims. One of them is a claim to a belief in a deity, and the other one is a claim to a degree of confidence in any particular belief. You can be Gnostic or agnostic about literally anything in your life. It literally has to do with knowing or not knowing. So a lot of times when you ask people if they believe in God, they will tell you they're agnostic, and that's not really them taking a position on the subject. They're just basically telling you they don't really know. They're usually going to be an agnostic theist or an agnostic atheist, which means they have a belief or they don't have a belief, but they don't really know. And then on the other side of that is a Gnostic theist and a Gnostic atheist, and that is people who are very confident in their knowledge that God exists or God does not exist. So those are two completely different concepts, and they don't they get conflated a lot of times because of the way people answer that question. Moving on, there are a couple of different kinds of atheism. There's hard atheism and there's soft atheism. The hard atheist position is an assertion that God or gods do not exist, and that position comes with a burden of proof. There is the soft atheist position, which is a majority of atheists, and that is the position that you come to them and you say God exists, and they simply reject your claim. It's like coming to them and saying Bigfoot exists. They say prove it. Or fairies exist. They say prove it. You say God exists. They say prove it. That's the soft atheist position. And most people who identify as an atheist typically take a mixed view depending on which layer you're looking at. They will typically reject the position of a deistic God, but they will oftentimes take a hard atheist position and assert that Yahweh, Allah, Zeus, any of the named gods that we've been exposed to in human history are myth and do not exist. So you don't necessarily have to be binary on one side or the other side of atheism between not knowing or it all depends on the God. You can have a different position on any God. And then the next relevant term is the closet atheist. These are atheists who continue to go to church. They continue to go through the motions. Typically, the two major reasons for this is that they don't know if God exists, but they fear hell, so they keep doing it. And the other major reason is because they have a social pressure, a family member, friends, community. They've built a life around it. These are the two major things that keep people going to church, even though they no longer believe in the God that they're praying to. And then there's one more category I wanted to touch on, and that's clergy members and preachers who are atheists, because many of them will go on a long search for God to try and make sure that they're giving their congregation the truth, and then they'll end up with the conclusion that God's not around. But they've dedicated their whole life to this. They they don't know what or how they would do or get a different job or anything like that. And for people who are in that situation, there are charities and communities that have popped up to help them. The Clergy Project is one that comes to mind off the top of my head, that is dedicated to, they have both theists and atheists to help with members of the clergy who are trying to leave the pulpit and not completely destroy their lives around it. So those are all of the basic colloquial uses of the definition for atheism. At least those are the most typical ones. And then the kind of atheism that we were going to be discussing today is of a more of a philosophical nature. And I'll go ahead and let Steve introduce his position, and then I will explain why I think he's wrong.
Okay. Well, you said a lot of things. I did take notes here. First, some of these things are not colloquial definitions, even by colloquial standards, such as what you were saying about agnosticism. Atheism comes from atheos, which is not without. It actually is godless. This was a term that was designated to Christians who didn't accept the Roman pantheon gods. They were godless. So the negation of godless, it would be the belief that the proposition of theism is false. So when we're talking about propositional stances, when we're talking about belief that some God exists, atheism has been traditionally defined as the negation of the proposition that God exists, right? So it means godless, as in does not believe in God. Okay, so not just lacking a belief, but actually having the positive epistemic status of believing God does not exist. Your misunderstanding of Gnosticism, agnosticism, the word agnosticism came from Thomas Henry Huxley, and he didn't use Gnosticism or Gnostic meaning knowledge. So your etymology is incorrect on that. The reason why he used nos, which is nos, in the term agnosticism, was to indicate an illusion of knowledge, not the presence of knowledge or not lack of knowledge, but the illusion of knowledge. This is by Robert Flint in 1903 in his book Agnosticism. And what he meant by this was that Thomas Henry Huxley felt like he was out of place in these societal norms. He felt like he didn't have any real position labeled that satisfied what he thought the ontological or epistemological nature of God was. So he came up with this term agnosticism. It was not meant lacking of knowledge. It was to actually make a little bit of condemnation for what he perceived to be the modern Gnostics of his age, who he thought didn't have any justification to claim that God exists or God did not exist one way or another from a knowledge or belief position. SEP, you talked about agnosticism being, again, with knowledge. That's not what SEP or many other places say on it. Agnosticism is defined SEP-wise as, quote, an agnostic is a person who has entertained the proposition that there is no God, but believes neither that it is true nor that it is false. Nothing related to knowledge in that particular definition. It has to do with the fact that a person has not reached a position on the proposition. They're undecided. So as you said, they don't know how to answer the question. It's an ordinary type of knowledge they don't have. They're not any kind of epistemic knowledge. So they don't know how to answer the question properly. But it's not that they're lacking knowledge. It's just that they haven't come to a decision yet. So they can't say the proposition is true or false. So according to every academic standard out there, and it has nothing to do with knowledge. The soft atheism position, you said that there is a standard out there for that to have a burden of proof. Dr. Martin and Dr. Malik both argue that even negative atheism has some type of burden of proof. We can get into that. And then the positions on agnosticism, you said are colloquial or normative. Actually, no, the agnosticism originally was designed to be what's called an epistemic normative principle, or a system of looking at something. Very similar to logical positivism or the early formation of the scientific method. But there is an agnostic proposition, which is the knowability of gods. That is true. That does exist, but that's not normative. That's not how people talk about agnosticism in the literature. The term agnosticism is basically somebody who has not sufficient conditions or justification to say that God exists or God does not exist. That's all.
Okay, I think I can accept most of that. I was kind of going by, when I type Gnostic into Google, it tells me relating to knowledge, especially esoteric mystical knowledge. And that was kind of where I had
Yeah, that's why we don't. That's why we don't use Google and you know, those kind of sources in these kind of discussions. It's kind of like Google's only going to tell you so much, right? I mean, it's only going to give you some very basic understanding.
I just assumed that the colloquial usage would be the most popular one at the top of the list.
Just because that's the definition doesn't mean it's colloquial usage. You ask anybody. I
suppose that's true.
Yeah, you ask anybody, you know, are you agnostic on a proposition? They're going to say, well, yeah, it means that I don't have a position on the proposition. They're not going to say, well, I lack knowledge on it, right, or some esoteric thing. That's, to me, is colloquial.
Okay. Well, when I watched your other debate, it occurred to me that your position on that the philosophical atheist position is that it's an assertion that God does not exist, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And and this is based on, with classical logic, you have P, the proposition God exists, that would be theist, and then you have its negation, not God exists, and then that would be atheism, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so if your position is that you don't take a position, correct? You don't know either way.
I don't take a direct position. Agnosticism is a position. It's a second order position. But I don't take a direct position, which would be saying that it's true or false, or God exists or God does not exist. Right.
Okay. So if I were to express that in classical logic, that would be not God and not God, correct? Or a not P and not P, correct?
Well, you could, but that's a double negation. But a double negation for not P is just P, so it's P or not P.
But I'm asserting to you that not P is not necessarily P, because not P and not P, by accepting both of those at the same time, you're creating a third position.
Not P. Not P is always P.
Is still not P.
No, not P is a double negation. The negation of a
negation only in a dichotomy.
A dichotomy would be P or not P.
But you want to add a third position, and you want
to. The third position is not in P or not P. You only have P or not P is a dichotomy. There's no third position in classical logic for that.
But you're asserting that the position that you're asserting is a third position.
But not to P or not P. That's, I think you have confusion there.
Well, the position you're asserting is that not P and not P at the same time, because you're saying,
no,
I'm not accepting the proposition and I'm not accepting the proposition's negation.
No, that's not correct. Okay, I think you have some confusion here. So there is a dichotomy between P and not P. Okay, you cannot have, because the law exclude a middle, you cannot have a proposition be true or false at the same time, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so P or not P is a actual dichotomy. And if you put it as P or not P equals true, that's called a tautology, correct? You assume it's so. But it is a dichotomy. You agree with that? Okay, so when you have a predicate of belief, right, the belief, if you want to keep it a dichotomy, would be believes P or does not believe P, right? BP or not BP. That is also a dichotomy. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
You either believe, you don't believe, right? Now, agnosticism is not the third position of either of those. What it is between what's called contradictory of BP and B not P. So believes P is true, believes P is false. In between that, you have a third position, which is the position that believes neither. It doesn't believe it's true and it doesn't believe it's false.
And by what I'm asserting is that by not accepting P as true, you fall on the not P side of the narrative.
You fall on, well, no. If you don't accept it as true, it means you neither, agnostic would be not BP and not B, not P. It means that you do not believe the proposition is true and you do not believe the proposition is false. It's, for example, my magic cup here full of which is only water right now, right? But we'll do the gumballs thing, right? So this assume this is full of quantized gumballs. It can only be an even or an odd number amount, okay?
Right.
Let's say 50 or 51 or something, okay? If I say, hey, Patient Beard, the number of gumballs in this cup are even, how would you respond?
That's our proposition.
Right.
I'm sorry, I was talking.
How would you respond if I say the proposition is that they're even? Would you say that's true or false? You're agnostic on it. The third position.
How would I respond to the number of gumballs in there is even? I would ask how you knew that.
No. Now you're asking about You're asking about a completely different thing. How I know that is ridiculous.
I'm an engineer. I tend to ask questions when
but that's not relevant to the question. I'm asking you a simple proposition. What's your status on that proposition right now without any expository on it?
I do not accept the claim that the gumballs are even.
So you're agnostic on it.
Sure.
Okay, so that is the third position, because it's a person who does not accept whether it's true or false.
And the agnostic position is in the category not P.
No, why is it in not P? Not P would be that they're odd, that they're not even. You're not even here being odd. I'm not affirming that they're odd or even. I'm saying that they're neither, right? What you're doing is you're negation raising. A negation raising is actually something that does exist and actually is legit, but it's a speech act thing. It's a perlocutionary act. What a negation raising is, it's say, hey, patient, are you going to the party tonight? And you say, no, I don't think I'm going. Well, we interpret that as you're not going, right? You think that you're not going, and that's perfectly fine to do. So, but that's not how it works in logic. So you say, I don't believe that they're even. You're not saying that you believe they're odd. Unless I inquire further, you could be either believe that they're odd, or you could be agnostic on it. You could be either one. I don't know unless I ask another question.
Okay. I know where my ADHD brain wanted to take me. The thing is that we are defining both the gumballs are odd and I do not believe the gumballs are even under the same umbrella term.
You are. I'm not. That's the atheist position. That's why I think it's absurd to do so. There's actually 4 positions if you really want to get pendant about it. Look, you could believe that they're even, you could believe that they're odd, you could believe that they're neither, or you could actually believe that they're both, but that's obviously a state of irrationality, right? But there are things with cognitive dissonance and what's called peculiar reasoner or Moore's paradox, where you can have these weird things in atheistic logic that you can't say in classical logic, because that would be a contradiction. But it obviously is not a dichotomy. Would you agree? Even if you have just a 3, if you even neglect the fact that you can have an irrational state, I can believe they're true, even I can believe they're odd, or I can believe neither. That is not a dichotomy.
So what basically you're saying is that in classical philosophy, atheism is defined as a negation, as the single negation, God does not exist, of the proposition.
It's accepted to be, when you read it in the literature, if you see the word atheist, it's called an unmarked, meaning that it doesn't have any markedness to it, as in it doesn't have to be explained differently. It's accepted to be the case in linguistics. So when you see the term atheist in 99% of the papers, if you read any of them, it's all going to be under the guise of God does not exist, or that the proposition of theism is false.
Now when you say 99% of the papers, are you talking about classical literature? Are you talking about
contemporary classical? Every paper I've seen so far. Yeah, I haven't seen one that. Yeah. Okay. The only one that even comes close would be one by Bullivant in Oxford's Handbook of Atheism, but he's not really. He's advocating more either one's acceptable position, and he wants to base it on etymology. Martin would be another one that's kind of, but even they don't come out and say, look at, this theism belief is the way it is in philosophy. They've never said that. And even Anthony Flew in 1972, when he wrote The Presumption of Atheism, came right out and said, hey, atheism is the belief that God does not exist, but I want to change it, is what his own words were, basically.
Okay. So then would you agree that atheism is used more often, by my definitions, on video, just kind of on a allegorical?
I would agree that they're used more often by internet atheists, but atheists in general worldwide, and the ones I talk to in real life, no.
Okay, well maybe I need to do a little more study in philosophy, because that's definitely a big rabbit hole, and that's definitely not something I'm studied on.
Well, would you agree, patient, that okay, everything you've said before, to date so far on this that I've seen, honestly, literally seems to me exactly the narrative like the atheist community of Austin and American Atheist puts out. So let me ask you, in preparation for this, are there the sources that you're going to, or are you going to the actual academic sources to see how I'm relating to these things? Because I know your sources.
That definition of atheism is the definition of atheism that I identified with leaving theism, leaving the faith.
Right. No, I get that.
It came to me from a lot of, I will admit that I do watch a lot more video than I read. And those videos and that definition and everything, it kind of helped me with a lot of things, and it helped me to kind of identify myself when I was leaving theism and how to see things. I can't say I've ever done any research into the history or the historical uses of the word beyond my exposure to it in the last 10 years. So if your assertion is that they're trying to change the meaning of the word, I would say that they were effective.
Well, here's the assertion. And by the way, like I said, you're only going to get one side if you don't actually read the literature that I'm telling you about.
Okay.
This is a political agenda that you're espousing, believe it or not. This was actually promulgated first by Anthony Flew in 1972, but also continued by David Silverman with American Atheist in his book Fighting God. They did want to actually change the definitions. They actually contacted Oxford and Merriam-Webster and added the lack of belief position. Now, here's the thing with it, that these definitions are descriptive, right? They're not prescriptive. So when you see Oxford definition, all they're saying is how this word is used, right? It's used as either the belief that God does not exist, which has been for 300 years, or as a lack of belief, as you note, that the internet atheists use. So it's ascribing usage. It's not prescribing. It's not telling you this is how it should be used, and it's certainly not telling you how it should be used if you go write a paper on this, right? If you take a college course in this, is not the terminology you're going to be using, this lack of belief usage. So the reason for this, the reason why they have it, Paul Draper notes in SEP very clearly that this was as a political thing to increase the numbers of atheists, especially to, I think, artificially increase the number of atheists. It is a political movement to have political power. I get that, and I'm not against that for that reason. I understand it, right? I think that if you're going to want to have political power, then that is a good argument to have. But my counter argument to that, which you can address, is if that's the route you want to go, do not atheists lose credibility because now they're using rhetoric and loss of precision and loss of rigor, loss of logic, and they have things that produce category errors and absurdities. And if that's the route they want to go, doesn't it harm their political agenda more than it helps? Because once people start finding out the truth, right, and people are more atheists are finding out that I am correct on these things, and that the American atheists, community of Austin, American atheists are not putting out the full information. They're saying things like atheism is just a lack of belief, nothing else to it, bar none. We all know that's fundamentally wrong now. They won't correct that. I've talked to Pam Whistler, the editor of American Atheist, who's a very, very sweet woman, like her a lot. But they know that's for political thing. And she told me to tell people, and you can ask her, Steve, if people ask you about philosophy and American Atheists, tell them American Atheism is not a philosophical organization. They're not there to promote philosophy. They're not there to promote these types of things. So I ask you, if atheism is now going to be in this political arena rather than what I think it started off as for promoting of critical thinking and rational thought and factual thought based upon academia, right? People write books and talk about these things. Then is it really helping the atheist community? Is it really promoting them and adding to their numbers effectively?
Well, I began to identify as an atheist, and I got a lot of information from a lot of different places, but I never I never took any political advice from any of these groups. I've never been one to try and listen to, well, the atheists are saying this candidate should vote. The atheists are
that's not what I mean. But you don't have to. You don't have to do that. But it's still political movement.
The other political side of the coin, and I have been kind of in agreement with it, is when they use atheism to maintain a separation of church and state. When they're removing, religious iconography from government buildings and stuff like that where they don't belong. I
don't need atheism for that. You agree with that? I mean, I support that. I look at, we both are not theists, right?
That definition helped me to be an atheist. I guess.
And I get that, but we're talking about political power, right? I'm a nun, right? You're a nun.
Right.
I could vote just as easy to have separation of church and state and still have the academic rigor without sacrificing that, without using lies of omission by saying atheism is only this. That's all it is, like American Atheist does. I don't have to do that. I can say, here's the academic usage of these words and why it's sound to do so, and here's these internet atheist groups definitions. Okay, mine are more precise and more rigorous. I think you would agree with that. But at the same thing, either one of us can vote for candidates that support secular things, right? separation
Right.
of state.
So I'm just saying I've seen atheism like bolster its numbers and whatnot, but I haven't. I guess you ask, does it help bolster their numbers? And I'm saying, like it made me an atheist, but I don't have a good answer to your question, Steve.
No, that's fair. Okay, but at what cost? I mean, you've admitted, and by the way, you're articulate, and I like your dialogue, so thank you very much for that. Much better than the last person I engaged with who didn't know shit from Shinola. It was ridiculous. But here's the thing: if you haven't really looked in what I've presented, right, and you haven't looked at the academics, you haven't looked at the papers,
right,
then again, I don't know what your argument would possibly be. If we both want to agree that secularism is good, both want to have positions of power, that we don't allow for corruption of our educational system with like creationism, things of that nature, but I'm doing so with all cards on the table. I'm doing so with saying this is how it actually is in the academics literature, and there's reasons for that to be avoiding contradictions and category errors and absurdities. And you have these other atheist organizations out there going, hey, Steve's wrong. This is how it is. Atheism is just this, prescriptively telling people. Not all do this, by the way, and they are changing. I will note, and people have noted to me, Steve, because of what you've been saying, certain groups have been softening their approach a little bit because people have coming to them going, hey, you know what Steve's saying isn't incorrect. Why are you telling people that he is?
Well, I had kind of a different question.
Sure.
You brought up a couple of times that the current definition, the way the political movement is defining it, is leads to absurdities. What absurdities are you talking about? I'm just kind of curious. I hadn't heard that before.
Well, if you are one of those people that say there's a dichotomy there, that you're only a theist or atheist, that everything has to be theist or atheist, because there is a dichotomy if you have A or not A, and you instantiate that with theist, right? You have theist or not theist, or everything has to fall into those categories. Everything that's not in the set of theist, whether you're a person or non-person, it doesn't matter, right? Because A or not A, theist or not atheist, you can then segregate in that into then segment it off by persons. But if you look at it as a whole, everything that's not a theist must fall into the category of not theist, which includes inanimate objects like rocks, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, if they say, look, at non-theist and atheism are existentially and intentionality the same, at the same intentional state, okay, which means that I could take the word non-theist and put it in a proposition, replace it with atheist, and that proposition not change its truth value. That's called intentionality. I've shown that that's not the case. I've shown they do have a different intentionalities, and so it does change the truth value in some cases. They are not the same thing. But if you insert that they're the same thing, then you're saying all rocks are atheist, which some YouTubers like Bionic Dance promotes that. She actually understands that part of the logic, that if you say all theist, all things are not theist, and if all not theist are atheist, rocks must be atheist. She argues that. That's her argument. Other atheists go, no, that can't be the case, and they'll try to manipulate the way out of it. But that is an absurdity, in my opinion, a reductio absurdum, that if you use the terminology you're using, it does lead into all rocks are atheist.
Okay, so basically your position is that what I have presented here today is the non-theist position. Mostly.
What do you mean?
Instead of the atheist position would be what I had presented as the hard atheist position, and everything else I talked about would be a non-theist position.
Well, if you don't have a belief in God, you're a non-theist, right? So believes God exists or does not. So if you be P or not P, believes P or does not believe P. If you does not believe P, you're a non-theist, right?
Right.
Okay, we agree.
And an atheist is someone who says that God does not exist.
Right.
And your goal is to get the definitions, to get people to start using the right words to mean.
Not necessarily. No, I mean, I would like that, but that's not really a goal of mine. My goal is actually have people understand the different definitions, because where they've been told for years there's only one definition. There's only one true correct definition, which is a lack theist position. They're finding out that is not the case. And so my goal is merely to educate people, define how you want to be defined, take the terminology you want to take, but if you do, you have to be able to at least explain the baggage that comes along with it, such as, why you think rocks are atheist, or why do you think theological and cognitivists are atheists, which I've gone into that argument before.
All right. Well, I'm going to concede that point to you. I I don't really have the background, I think, to counteract it, and it kind of makes sense from that point of view.
Welcome to the fold. No, it's fine. Look at I have a lot of respect for people that will listen to what I have to say and actually go check it out. I don't expect people to take me at face value. Why would they? I really expect people to go validate. And I have citations on my webpage, www.greatdebatecommunity.com, where I cite the papers that say this. And I've read all of them, whether it be Jackson, Martin, Flew, Mosier, McCormick. I mean, I have 20 some odd papers alone cited on that citational list, and all of them are in consilience with each other, right? So when you have groups like American Atheists that say atheism is lack of belief, and that anybody who lacks a belief is an atheist, if you like it or not. David Silverman basically said, if you do not believe in God, you're an atheist. If you don't agree with that, tough shit. Paraphrase, but basically what he said. Well, to the people that are the Gnostics that say, look, I'm not wanting to be lumped in to the same people that believe God does not exist, because that is a different distinction, right? I mean, I have a different position on this, and to say that him and I, somebody who doesn't believe God exists versus somebody who believes God does not exist, those are two different, very different categories, right? And so I think there's benefits to have a distinction. So let me ask you, what is your ontology? Do you actually hold a belief that there are no gods?
Yes, I definitely, I would definitely be able to argue against like Yahweh and all of the ones that are pretty much known mythology. But looking at the universe the way it is, I think that we have the kind of a universe that suggests that either a God does not exist, or if a God does exist, it would be a God that kickstarted it and walked away, and that kind of God is just as good as no God at all. So I do hold to the position that gods do not exist, but I would not be able to show any kind of burden of proof for
you just did.
Well, there you go.
I mean, granted, I would say that's a weak burden. I would, you could suss that out greater if we had more time, but it sounds like you're well on your way, right? Mm-hmm. So what do you say to the people that have told me, hey, Steve, there are no atheists who believe God does not exist. If you define it that way, there are no atheists. And I'm like, I meet them every day. I know tons of people that are atheists. They're very strong atheists. Not only do they believe God does not exist, some of them will actually claim knowledge, which I think is a bit excessive.
Just one more God than you.
But what do you say to those people that say, hey, atheists like you don't exist?
I ask them about Zeus. If you don't believe in Zeus, you're an atheist towards Zeus. I mean, it's
well, that's true. That's local, though. Globally. We're talking global.
Globally?
Yeah. Global, like worldwide. I mean, globally as in all gods.
Well, I don't know. I actually know a lot of people who are more deistic than atheistic. That they'll tell me they don't believe in God, they don't have a religion, but they'd say, or they'll tell me they believe in God, but they don't have a religion, and they don't hold to the Bible or any particular book. They're a lot of those people tend to tell me they're spiritual too, but you know, that's a different category. But for the most part, I think you know, a lot of people I am surrounded by are still religious these days. So
all right, well, let me ask you this again. I don't have the belief gods don't exist, right? I don't have a belief either way. Does it make sense to you rationally, from a philosophical standpoint, just as a critical thinker? Does it really make sense for you and I to be in the same category if somebody says, hey, Steve, what is your belief compared to what Patient Beard believes? We completely believe in different things, right? And that's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. If I say I'm agnostic, I'm telling a person like James what my position actually is. I'm telling him I don't have a position on the proposition. And you're saying, hey, I'm speaking as you right now, Patient Beard, but if you say I'm atheist, it's understood outside your communities to mean you hold the belief that God does not exist, right? Now, inside your community is not necessarily so, which leads to confusion. Mm-hmm. My way doesn't lead to confusion, because in the academic circles that I run into, right, and that I involve myself in, when they talk about atheism, they're using it the way I'm using it, almost ubiquitously. So there's no confusion to be had there. If somebody says I'm agnostic or an atheist, there's a distinction there. And when you start juxtaposing ontology with epistemology, like atheist, agnostic atheist, there's confusion there. And by the way, Matt Dillahunty does accept that agnostic atheism in the weak case, meaning a lack of belief case, is nonsensical. You cannot be a weak atheist and then you take the title agnostic atheist and think that's sensible, if that's a word. I use that word frequently. It's not technically a word yet. It's almost a word.
Yeah, that all kind of makes sense. Damn it, my ADHD brain dropped half of what you said. It
Oh,
does
no
that to
worries,
me.
no worries. There's a lot to take in here, man.
Mhm.
I'm just glad, like I said, that people like you are willing to
I
because I'm not irrational, I'm not logical. Anybody who knows these topics will tell you that this is commonplace. I'm not telling you any like really deep stuff. This is just stuff you'll find, but most people don't take the time to read it. They hear what they want to hear off the YouTube channels. These atheists out there promoting this lack of belief stuff, and they don't ever go beyond that, which I find. You cannot claim you're a free thinker or a critical thinker if you don't investigate claims of people that are agreeing with you. I mean, you should investigate everything. That's
right.
how you formulate a very sound ontological framework and epistemological framework.
Well, I think I'll add non-theism to my vocabulary there. I think that's a good start.
Be wary of that, because I do use non-theism, but the problem with describing yourself as a non-theist, again, it's just as vague as anything else. What are you? I'm a non-theist. What does that mean? If you ask somebody, if they're a theist, okay, great, they're a theist, that God exists, but they're really not telling you what their particular denominations are, right? It's pretty vague as a whole, right? People don't go around saying, hi, look, I'm a theist. No, they say I'm a Christian, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Jew, right?
Well, if they ask you a question back, it's a good conversation starter, and it's a good point in a direction you might want to take the conversation to.
That's completely up to you. How do you want to run your dialectics? I don't find an issue with that. Sure. All right. Hey, beating of the minds. This was fun. Mazel tov. Can we drink now?
Yeah.
We can drink now.
If you guys want to go to some Q&A and field some questions, we can jump right into it.
Sure. Go nuts.
This has been really fun. So let's see here. Oh, a couple of new subscribers. Thanks for subscribing. Forgive me if I mispronounce this. Leyland Allen and Easyism Works. Glad to have you here. So if I missed anybody who subscribed, sorry about that. But we're glad you're here. And for the questions, Tyler Durden asks, why does he say atheos was coined to describe early Christians?
No, not coined. That's how it was used.
And then
he said godless.
Oh, okay. So he says Socrates was accused of being atheos in 399 BC, well before the earliest Christians.
Yeah, not coined. That's just how it was used.
Oh, okay.
It's been around for a while.
You got it. Next, Physio Atheist asks, can you ask the debaters if they consider the distinction between I believe there are no gods, quote unquote, and I do not believe in any gods, quote unquote, to be useful?
Patient, you want to take it, or?
It sounds like a useful distinction to me.
Yeah. Now, again, I mean, it is a useful distinction. Now, again, but in normal general parlance, negation raising is a thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. If Patient Beard says, I don't think there's aliens, I'm really going to take him to believe, as without getting into philosophical things, that he believes there are no aliens, right? That's just, again, a persecutionary effect that we have in society on the speech acts. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that if you're not talking about classical logic. If I say, patient, what time is it? And he looks at his watch and says, well, I don't think it's 3, right? That's not really informative, right? It doesn't tell me anything. But if I ask him, hey, patient, is it noon? And he says, I don't think so. Again, I'm going to interpret that as he thinks that it is not noon. It is not noon, right? This is how communication works. So there's a legit negation raising to say that I do not believe equals I believe. But that's only in linguistics. We're not talking about that as far as logic. Would does that make sense to you, Patient Beard? That there's a distinction to be had there. So it is useful to sometimes think that I do not believe equals I believe, but that's not our discussion here.
It makes perfect sense, and for the record, I'm a non-alienist.
You got it. Very nice. Next one up. Thanks for that question, by the way, and your guys' answers. Physio Atheist asks, can you ask the debaters if they consider... Oh, sorry, that was the one. Tyler Durden asks, what is the point of harping on the quote-unquote burden of proof? Is the atheist supposed to present this to others in a conversation? Is it just personal?
Oh, I love that question. The burden of proof is what makes something rational, right? And if atheists are going to be saying that they're the rational people, right? They want to have the narrative that they're more rational than the theist. I get that. I don't have a problem with that. But you cannot do so and then throw away the burden of proof, because the burden of proof is what holds our beliefs to be rational. They're not owed to anybody else unless you make it a burden of persuasion. If I hold the belief that something is the case, that burden of proof is to myself to justify it. Else I have an irrational or a rational position, which is fine. Irrational does not mean irrational. I have a lot of beliefs that I cannot justify. I accept that. That's the problem of being a foundationist and realizing that there's certain things that we have no justification to believe either way. External minds existing, for example, solipsism. The problem of hard solipsism can't be solved, so we accept it irrationally. Induction working day to day, right? Uniformity of nature. These things we all accept irrationally because you cannot justify them in any way. You can't use induction to justify induction. You can't use rational to justify rationalism, right? So you cannot use reason to justify reason. These are all irrational things. So I think that if you're going to be putting out the position that you are the critical thinker, that you're the rational person, and you throw away the burden of proof or try to avoid it, it doesn't say very much for me about your position, because you should be going out of your way to own the burden of proof. Patient here said, well, I may not be able to beat my burden of proof, but he kind of started to, at least. He was well on his way, and he certainly could suss that out and make it very easy burden of proof, right? Burden of proof does not mean you have to prove God exists or prove that God does not exist. That's not what it means. Just like the Big Bang doesn't mean bang. It just means you have to justify it with reason. That's it. It's an epistemic burden.
I would like to just add to what he said. I find that it's best to throw the burden of proof back at people making claims when their claims are unfalsifiable. If they're trying to make a claim to you that God exists but behaves exactly like nature, that's when you want to throw the burden of proof back at them, because they're making an unfalsifiable claim.
But that's burden tennis. Both people have a burden of proof in a dialectic. Both people, right? You can't just say it's one-sided. There are one-sided cases, right? They're rare. If you're defending a thesis, you have a one-sided burden of proof. If you're giving a speech in front of people, you have a one-sided burden of proof. There are times, but in a dialectic between two people, we each bring to their table our own burden of proof. So if I said, hey, I claim this is the case, and Patient Beard, you say, well, I don't believe you, which is the lactheist type thing, you have to have reasons for why you don't believe me, or else you're holding an irrational position. Your lack of belief is irrational.
Well, if the position is not unfalsifiable, like if someone tells me to try and disprove God, my response to them is disprove Mary's me, and we'll use your
that's burden shifting. Not you doing. They're burden shifting to you, and you call them out on it. If they're saying, right, I believe God exists, disprove him, they're burden shifting. They're wrong just as much, right?
Okay, I was conflating burden with burden shifting. I was trying to reference burden shifting and preventing it. That was my point.
Yeah, burden tennis isn't, it's just you guys are going back and forth, but you both bring a burden to the table. But you can't say, I believe this is true, if disprove it. That is burden shifting. But if you say, I don't believe you, if I say, hey, I bought a cat today, and you say, well, I don't believe you, I'm going to want to know why, right? I'm going to
because you have a history of lying.
Thank you, right? If you have a history of lying, if I'm allergic to cats, you have to have some reasons. But if I say, hey, Patient Beard, I believe external minds exist, and that's all you know about the situation, you're not going to say, I don't believe you without reason, right? Because then you have, to me, an irrational position that I don't exist.
Right.
So you even by saying I do not believe, there needs to be reasons why you don't believe. Michael Martin, Dr. Martin, advocates this in his paper on negative atheism. He even says that negative atheists have a duty to explain why they don't believe in a conversation kind of thing. He words it much better, but that's basically his assertion of it.
You got it. Thanks for your answers, and thanks for your super chat, Wayne Yates. Wayne Yates just weighed in and said, ask Steve why he doesn't believe in Santa Claus.
I actually have pages. I wrote about that much why I believe Santa Claus is bullshit. It's not just I lack a belief in Santa Claus. I know Santa Claus is bullshit. I'll make it a knowledge claim. And I actually have written extensively on that at one time. I'll have to find it for him. But it goes into great detail of the history of St. Nick. It goes into why I could show physically that you couldn't be able to, even at the speed of light, give all these presents to kids. And I wrote a lot about this stuff. It more than met my burden of proof that I complained that I know that Santa Claus does not exist. So it's not just I don't believe. It's not just I believe that he doesn't. I will claim knowledge. And if you want to argue the knowledge part from a skeptic point of view, which is really fun to do, I'm cool with that. You can claim there's no knowledge to be had. I get that, right? But you cannot argue that I'm not justified to believe that Santa does not exist.
I find the story of flying reindeer to be highly suspicious.
Yeah, there's a little bit much there. So yeah, I don't know why people relate the God claim to things like leprechauns and other things that we know that are mythos, right? There's not been 2,000 years of people dying and arguing whether Santa Claus exists or not. So it's not really, to me, really fair analogy, and yet I can actually show the history of Santa Claus, and so I am justified to believe that Santa Claus does not exist.
God was just the most powerful myth.
But you know what's funny? I have people that say, well, I can't say I believe Santa Claus does not exist. I'm like, so what are you, 3? I wrote a blog on the problem of not believing, it's called, and it is basically this narrative that people will not say that I exist. They'll not make that claim. They'll not say that they believe that I exist. I'm like, do you understand how foolish your epistemology sounds right now by doing that? They don't want to make claims. I don't get it.
You could be an AI. You might not, you know.
I could be, but that has no bearing on whether you believe me or not.
That's true.
These are just
I suppose you still exist on my screen. You still exist on my screen, so I guess that's good enough.
But there's just because there's the bare possibility that I might be an AI, right, is logically possible. Doesn't mean you're justified to withhold affirmation that I am, or justified to believe that I'm not. That's to me would be an absurd way to go through life, that you're just accepting any bare possibility as the case.
For me, it was the devil. It was the devil that was making me accept absurd things, because it was my fear of the devil, and accepting the devil as something existed allowed me to accept that at one point there was a dome over the earth.
Oh, you were a young Earth creationist?
No, not a young Earth creationist, but when I was searching for the truth and finding my way out of religion, I kept finding these things that kind of pulled me back in for another loop around. And one of those things was that the flat Earth was a conspiracy to hide a loving God from us. And then I went and I dove into the flat Earth for about a week. Maybe it was 2 weeks. And then I looked at the star patterns on the southern stars, and I looked at how much of the Earth is lit up on the flat Earth model in the summer and the winter, and I was like, this just doesn't make any goddamn sense. And that was just it was just one of those many things when you're, you know, when you so badly want to believe in a God, and you so badly want to believe that the last 20 years of your life, you know, of being indoctrinated into something weren't for nothing. You find a lot of excuses to explore routes back, and that was one of them.
No, I get that. No, I can imagine. Right. I was only a theist for a certain amount of years, but it wasn't too difficult for me to leave.
Yeah.
Got Sentinel Apologetics with a super chat. Thanks so much. And they said Steve McRae's existence is proof that God exists.
I can get that.
You got it. Nice. Speed of Sound, thanks for your super chat. He said, it's all good. Here is a buck or two. I'm a little confused by that. I'm not sure where that... but anyway, thanks for that. We appreciate it. Next up, question from Tyler Durden. He had said from his last question, he said they did not talk about the actual topic. Which definition should we use and why? All we got was the millionth Philosophy 101 vocab quiz.
I did answer that. I said I prefer using the definition I use because they don't lead to absurdities, contradictions, category errors. So if your goal is to be the rational person in the conversation, and you want to be take the high road over a theist, right? I would recommend using the philosophical definitions, because then you are at least comporting with the literature, and you're not involving your ontology with these types of absurdities like rocks are atheist, or theological cognitivists or atheists would be a category error. So that's why I think that we should be using these terminologies. But if you're going to be using it for political reasons, then there is something to be said from patient usage of it, right? To nominalize the term atheism.
Well, and what did you say we should use to describe ourselves as neither not agnostic? Is that what you?
Well, you can describe yourself as an atheist either way.
I know,
right?
but I mean, for your position, your position is an agnostic.
I'm an agnostic, yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
Next, Sentinel Apologetics wanted me to mention that he put a heart at the end of his super chat for you, Steve.
He loves me.
So next up,
Sentinel Apologetics. Well, which one is it? Is it Robert?
I might, for some reason, I always guess Robert, but I don't actually know, because Robert was the first half that I met, but we'll find out. So next up, thanks for that question. By the way, is it possible there are bots in the chat? Is that like a thing people can do?
Possible. Why?
Oh,
Sure.
okay. There's a person in the chat that people the last couple of debates have been saying that person's a bot, and I was like, I didn't know it was possible to do that, but
Well, you've
Well,
heard the NPC meme. They could just be very repetitive.
yeah, no, I mean, we get people that people that follow me around in these conversations that sound like bots because they're just parroting that I'm wrong and that I'm straw manning and all this other nonsense. They never provide anything of substance. They leave multiple comments, but they never say anything. It's all one big just, oh, Steve's wrong. He's a goopy head. I don't bother with any of those people. They have nothing to offer me whatsoever.
You got it. Don't worry. This for once they weren't coming off. They were not coming after you. And Sentinel Apologetics says it's Han, so I'm pretty sure that's Rob.
Okay.
And next up, thanks for your patience, Walter White asks, question, Steve, do atheists exist, or are they just confused agnostics?
Well, of course they exist. We have one right here.
Right?
Patient Beard is an atheist. He is not an agnostic. He's an actual, real, honest to God, if he exists, atheist.
God does not exist.
Yeah, I don't know how anybody would think that he's a confused agnostic. I think he actually believes there are no gods.
You got it. There you have it. Aiden asks, question for Steve, is it correct to say that you can be agnostic or gnostic towards any claim?
If you want to use gnostic in some type of epistemic modifier as a knowledge, whatever, Draper uses it differently. Instead of saying Gnostic theism, he'll call it theistic Gnosticism, by the way, if you go look in the literature. But if you want to say that you know God does not exist, that you're a Gnostic atheist, I know what you mean by that. You're just, all you're doing is elevating.
You're just belief. An atheist.
You're still an atheist, right? You're still an atheist. You're a subset of atheist, but you're an atheist that now is raising your belief claim to a knowledge claim, right? That's it. You're still an atheist, though, right? Agnostic atheist is. I wrote 3 blogs on this explaining how vague that actually is, how many different meanings that could possibly have. It's not found in the literature barely at all. Even Wikipedia says needs verification and citation. Go look up these terms. You won't find them in any of the academic papers because these experts recognize the problems with these multi-axial approaches where you have belief and knowledge. That's not how it is. If you look at like Dr. Malpass's use of reason, he has it on a landscape, single axial, right? And the more convinced you are, then you move from do not believe to knowledge, because knowledge entails belief and belief entails does not believe. There's a reason why logically that's coherent.
Gotcha. Thanks. And Physio Atheist asks for both. They may have already addressed this, but if you don't believe in at least one God and a lack of belief in all other gods, does that make you an atheist or agnostic?
Agnostic. By
Yeah.
the definitions we've agreed on today.
Yeah, if you look at, I'm an atheist to many gods, right? I believe very strongly that the young Earth creationist God is bullshit. Okay, and if that is contingent upon a young Earth, let me clarify. So if somebody says, look, the Earth is 7,000 years old, and God is the God of that 7,000-year-old Earth, I know the Earth is not 7,000 years old. That to me is falsified. So that being, if they want to claim that, does not exist. I am fully capable of defending that with my burden of proof. Okay, I will affirm that to no end. The God of flat Earth. If you say, hey, the Earth created the Earth flat, that God does not exist, right? So there's different interpretations of a deity that I can say straight out, I believe very strongly did not exist. But I don't have the belief that there are no gods globally. And a lot of self-proclaiming atheists don't have that. Would they be agnostic on the proposition? Yes. But would they call themselves agnostics? That's up to them. But the terminology is agnostic on P. And going by SEP, as I point out to patients, somebody who doesn't believe that the proposition is true or believe proposition is false, that just means they're agnostic on the proposition. But agnostic is a label as well. It doesn't mean you have to claim that label just if you are agnostic on the proposition, which you're not. You've taken a stance on it.
You got it.
Right.
Next up, praise I am that I am. Everyone's favorite is your chat. That's a good question. I love the impression by Dr. Josh. I'm sorry, praise, but I just love where he goes, that's been debunked so many times. So glad you're here, praise. I love you, buddy. He says, my question is to Jared is what non-anecdotal basis demonstrates Yahweh does not exist?
My favorite little piece of evidence that the Bible is complete and utter crap is, and I'm going to do a search. I think it's called Noah's Impossible Journey. If you Noah's Impossible Voyage, the Impossible Voyage of Noah's Ark, that is an article, and it goes through 20 or 30 different scientific claims that are made by the Ark and Young Earth creationists, and pretty much shows how each one of them completely falsifies the Ark entirely. My favorite one is that the Ark only had a 1 meter ventilation hole, which means that it would have filled up with methane and the animals would have suffocated unless there was a fabric, a spark, which would have blown it out of the water. So the sea life wouldn't have survived all of the changes in salinity and all of the mud that was stirred up. The light wouldn't have penetrated the surface. The whole article's got a whole just a whole lot of different things that each one of them individually itself will falsify the Ark narrative. And if you don't have the Ark narrative, you don't have the flood. And if you don't have the flood, you don't have God.
Or you can say that was all parable.
You could say that was all parable. I would say that if Yahweh does exist, he's a trickster God based on the laws he gave to his people in Exodus and Leviticus and Deuteronomy. I mean, there's a lot of things that just don't demonstrate omnibenevolence or omniscience or all-powerful. He sure does rely, for an all-powerful God who could just wipe people off the land in an instant, he sure does rely on his people to go and do the actual killing and enslaving of the foreigners. The Jesus narrative, none of it makes any sense, and as far as I can tell, it's just a cult that Paul started with some of his writings.
Do you realize that you're making your burden of proof right now? I mean, this is what a burden of proof is.
Yeah.
So
I'm saying that the if you look at the laws and for example, in Exodus 21, we have laws that indicate how you should own and beat your slaves. I would just take that law right there. I would say, based on this text, your omnibenevolent God can't exist, and that's my assertion.
I'm not disagreeing with you on anything you just said.
There's all. I mean, they did ask me what I would say about it. Like I said, the first thing I mentioned was Noah's Ark, and the second thing I would mention would be the bad laws. I could go on all day about it, but it's not even related.
No, I totally agree with you. And by the way, a lot of things you said are justifications of why I believe the younger creationist God doesn't exist. Right? Now, obviously, we agree upon that. But for a person who wants to play the lack of belief game, right? They could use everything you just said that can justify their lack of belief, but it also justifies them believing God, that particular God does not exist as well. So when a lack of belief atheist says they have no burden of proof, I don't know why they avoid it. So all they had to do was say what you just said. Boom, the burden of proof is met. Big deal. Is that really that complicated? Why are they going out of their way so much to avoid a burden of proof when in epistemology, any position requires a burden of proof? It's not just the idiom, the person making the positive claim has a burden of proof. That is true. But if you go read the literature, that's not the only. In fact, even fallacious reasoning, or even the fallacious arguments on that show you what is it called, fallaciouslogic.com, they even say that's not always the case, right? It even says there are cases where the person not making the positive claim has a burden of proof. So it's not only the positive case. So I don't know why people that are these internet atheists are so adamant about trying to avoid a burden of proof. I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me, because what you just articulated was a perfectly valid burden of proof to why you justify your position. I'm okay with that. You met it to me. You don't have to meet it to yourself, but I don't see a problem with what you did.
I just meant I could go on all day with that. I mean,
sure.
It all comes back to the book, and if the book's not reliable, neither that claim isn't reliable. So,
okay.
You got it. Thanks so much for answering that and for your question. Next up, Ben Lawrence asks Steve if being a modal realist necessarily makes one a theist.
Well, if modal realism would make you necessarily a theist if you believe that it's logically possible for gods to exist. Okay, but I have talked to Dr. Graham Priest on this about what's his name's work on modal realism. Name escapes me. Starts with a D. Somebody help me out here. But I've talked to him about this, and he does agree that's the case. but he thinks there are ways of arguing such that all gods are not even logical possibilities. I can't remember his name. I'm drawing a blank here of who the modal anti-realist person he promotes modal anti-realism. He promotes modal realism. My bad. And so, yes, if you're a modal realist and you believe gods are logically possible, and gods not only must exist in any possible world, but do exist in any possible world, and those possible worlds are ontologically something that does exist, you would by necessarily be a theist, yes. And I asked the foremost leader of modal logic that question. Is it Lewis? Is it Lewis? I think it's Lewis, not so the D. Is it Lewis that promotes modal realism? Because he has a way out of that, and I don't remember what it was.
I wish I knew. But thanks.
This is why we have Google at our fingertips, right? David. It is David. So David Lewis. Yeah. Okay. I D and Lewis. See, I was there. I just couldn't put the two together. David Lewis. Man, isn't Google great for that kind of stuff?
It is.
Right.
Man, I couldn't agree more. I was telling my friend the other day we were doing a project, and I accidentally cut a hole through what was not so, and it was like metal, so it was like, oh gosh, we have to start over. And I was like, you know what, with today's technology and especially the internet, where you can get an idea to fix almost anything, it's like we live in a great age. So Tyler, and it turned out, by the way, so we found a way. So let's see, Oshkosh Bajosh, thanks for your question. By the way, I was raised in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, so if you're from Oshkosh, congrats. Let's see. He said, ask Steve if naturalism would fall under atheism.
Yes. Well, let me clarify that. There's two different ways to look at it. According to Stanford and Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, atheism can be used to describe naturalism. I don't like that version. I think that atheism should be reserved for a single proposition. But they say it's acceptable, whatever. But I will argue, and have argued, that if you are a philosophical or ontological naturalist, to be rational, it would entail, or at least certainly imply, that you're also a strong atheist, that God does not exist. Because if you're denying all of supernaturalism, you're also denying gods if you accept supernatural gods to be supernatural. If you start arguing gods are natural, like a G-Man thing, I don't even know what the hell that means. Because if I had two of these cups and one was a natural cup and one was a non-natural cup, a god, right? If this was a cup, the god of cups, and I had another one duplicate to it that was a non-god of cups, I wouldn't know what the line of demarcation between them to differentiate them, right? What would be the eliminating thing between them? Absolutely nothing. Property-wise, they'd be indistinguishable from each other. So this whole idea of natural gods just means nothing to me.
All hail Steve's godlike cup.
Look at, man, could your cup do this? I don't think so.
I've always wanted that cup. It's awesome. Next, Tyler Durden, thanks for your question. He asked, how does the definition of atheist, quote unquote, a person who lacks belief in God or gods, lead you to say rocks are atheists? I've already explained that. And then he said, a rock is not a person.
Yeah, I've already explained that. Being a person or not has it relevant to the logic, right? Those are semantic things, right? A reductio ad absurdum shows something to be absurd, right? It doesn't care about linguistic formalities. It doesn't care about how things are defined linguistically, right? It only cares about the logic. A or not A, right? That's the law of excluded middle. Instantiate that with theism. What do you get? Theism or not theism? Then if you're just going to substitute by fiat theism equal atheism, you have theist versus atheist, right? And if you're not a theist, you're an atheist. So all rocks are non-theist, right? Because they're not theist. Therefore, they must be atheists according to that logic. And that logic is completely sound. Uriah Christensen made a formal proof of that. I made a informal formal proof of it that I even checked through a logic proof checker using first order logic. That is perfectly logical. So it's not invalid. And people can say, well, rocks aren't people. Well, that's irrelevant. That's why it's called a reductio ad absurdum. You're showing that it's absurd to say rocks are atheist. And some people do. We all know Bionic Dance actually advocates this position.
And I would say they did assert that belief was part of the definition when they were using that particular definition of atheism. So if you're going to say rocks are atheists, well, to be not an atheist requires a belief claim.
But again, now you're going to
have belief claims. So
those are semantics.
Yeah, it is absurd. You're right. It is absurd. I was just saying the position.
If you look at the logic I just gave you, anything, those words can mean anything. The word meanings don't matter. You're talking about the symbols. You're saying rocks are atheists. How you're meaning what that word to mean is irrelevant. You can say theist or not theist, not theist or apples, theist or apples. If you're not theist, you're an apple. Same thing. That's logic is valid either way. You can say, well, how could that be an apple if you're not I'm not a fruit, Well, that's the way the logic works. You're trying to make a semantic argument where there's none to be had when they do that kind of stuff. Yeah.
You got it. Thanks for that. And Saka Count asks,
oh, who let him in?
Does Steve believe that both propositions regarding God are equal, or can he conclude that the probability of a God exists is greater or less than the opposing view? And he says, sorry, there's a second part. He says, if we
go figure with Saka. Yeah.
If we form probabilistic conclusions all the time for knowledge claims, why is it insufficient for the God claim?
I tend to a little bit less than 50% for the entire God claim. I'm about where Malpass falls. Malpass is about 0.4. If you look at his diagram, 0.45. I'm probably around there right now, but I'm still in that what's called the penumbra of agnosticism. Right, it's not enough to convince me, but I do fall. I think it'd be very hard to justify somebody who says 50-50. Right now, on the gumball things, right, it's 50-50. Right, there's just no evidence either way. Right, so you can justify. I just as much could think that they're even or odd 50%, and it'd be a guess. Right, but in the case of the God claim, I tend to probably think it's less likely right now, only for the fact that I do an aggregate justification for my non-belief. Right, I do not believe. Right, so I have a burden of proof for that. I have a burden of proof for my agnosticism. Matter of fact, Bert Poole made a brilliant video about this. He said, look, Steve's right on this kind of stuff. Stop arguing him on the specifics and the philosophy. You're not going to win on that. Argue, is he justified to believe his agnosticism is warranted? Is he justified to hold his position? Does he meet his own burden of proof? That's the case, because I do have a burden of proof as an agnostic, just like Malik points out. So I would use an aggregate, saying, when you look at the logical problem of evil, the evidential problem of evil, divine hiddenness, moral, epistemological arguments against God, you look at divine liar's paradox, you look at all these arguments, even though they're mostly local ones, right? I think that you can make an aggregate argument that it's probably less likely that God exists than God does exist, compared to the theist arguments like the Aquinas' 5 waves and things like that nature, and the Kalam and fine tuning. So I'm of course marginally left to center toward atheist in that regard.
I would say there's 3 things for me that make it, and the first is we have a universe that we would expect without a God. The second is that we have 0 evidence for the supernatural in all of human history, and the third is that God has been wrong 100% of the time when we've asserted it to other supernatural or other natural processes. So I don't see why the creation of the universe should be any different.
I would deny 2, but I agree with 3. I think you can only use the argument there's no evidence if we expect there to be evidence, and I don't know what the expectation of evidence would be for God. But the fact that we've always found scientific explanation for things is that would be evidence against the narrative or hypothesis that God exists. I do agree, based upon Bayesian and prior probabilities. And I also agree that the argument that these beings that are being promoted and presented as some kind of concrete existence are very similar to the abstract ideas and concepts we have of mythical gods and superheroes, right? We've never gone out and prescriptively defined what would be the properties of Superman, right? They're described only because the author does it a priori, right? I mean, or you can argue that he prescribes it from a fictional character. Maybe that would be a way to put it. He says these are the characteristics, right? So we never a posteriori just go out and discover the properties of Superman. They're described to us by people, right? And same thing with God claims, right? Everything that's reminiscent of the quality of these deities, these properties, are very, very similar. They sound like fictitious creatures that we know of. They sound like being the same classification, the same category, right? Mm-hmm. So that is a very good argument to meet your burden of proof of why somebody believes God does not exist. There's nothing wrong with that.
You got it. Thanks so much.
I think a better atheist than most atheists. What the heck, man?
Next up, we have Tyler Jordan, who asks, where does he find all these atheists refusing the burden of proof? I never seem to see them anywhere but his Twitter.
Well, they exist on Twitter. They exist on Facebook. Go go in the atheist Discord sometimes. Go in various. They're all over the place. I mean, I don't think you're looking very hard enough, because I know a lot of, especially on G Plus, which is no longer around. But oh my goodness, on G Plus, I would see all the time people saying, atheist, I believe God does not exist, or gods are all bullshit, but I don't have burden of proof. Okay, look, you want to argue with me that Lactheist doesn't have burden of proof? We can go there, right? That's a fun argument. I'd like to have that. I will show you evidence where I guarantee you have none supporting the position, right? You ever notice nobody ever gives me any academic citation saying that Lactheist doesn't have a burden of proof? There's none, right? There's opinion by people out there, but there's nothing in the paperwork. Malik and Martin are actually in the paperwork. They actually have academic papers that are peer-reviewed saying that negative atheism doesn't have burden of proof. So I have 2 to 1. But these atheists, there are atheists out there who say, look, all gods are bullshit, but I don't have a burden of proof. I've seen it. I give you my word, I've seen this. And I guarantee it, there are people out there that have also seen this. I'm sure, have you not seen this? Come on, Patient Beard. I'm sure you've seen atheists do that.
Oh yeah, I'll admit to being guilty of that on a couple debates. I've sat there and asked people back for the burden on some of their claims. Usually the biggest one I'm guilty of is on Kalam. I like to ask them how they know it was intelligent, and then I like to sit there and watch them squirm.
Do you accept the Kalam is logically valid, though?
No, I accept the Kalam for the purposes of the debate. Okay, but is logic? But my question was, it's logically valid. It's logically valid, but the premises are flawed. Fair enough. Right. But I just accept the conclusion, because challenging the premises tends to lead into a lot of gish galop about quantum physics, and just accepting it and saying, how do you know it was intelligent, just really bypasses it and gets right to the crux of the problem. Yeah, no, I know. I'm okay with that. It's just that I've actually heard atheists say that the Kalam is not logically valid, and I just cringe, right? You just go, no, stop doing that stuff. You're making people look bad. I was going to say, I think that what they mean is that it's flawed, because I mean, you know, right, but that's all not people who wear green shirts can fly. I'm wearing a green shirt, I can fly. It's logically valid. Right. Doesn't work. Right. No, but see, my goal is to get people to understand that is logically valid, and not to make look at when you're talking to a theist. A lot of theists are well read on these things, right? And so if you're going to be telling them that something that we know is logically valid is not logically valid, you don't come across as somebody who's knowledgeable. Not you specifically, but I'm talking as atheists who say, "Oh, the Kalam isn't logically valid." Yes, it is. Stop doing that. Things like modus ponens are like that are like always logically valid. They may not be truth preserving. There's some question of that. But they're a logical real inference. So, yep, they're just flawed. Yeah, that's fine. I'm okay with that.
You got it. We have one more that just came in. Chaos Theory. Thanks for your question. They're coming after you, Steve. They said, ask Steve why does he ban all the Christians from his channel?
What?
Well, yeah, I don't know.
Nancy Thomas is a mod in my channel. She's in the chat right now. I was just on her show yesterday. What are you talking about? I got tons of people that all kinds of beliefs on my channel. That's just weird. Who said that? It
was Chaos Theory. A new person.
Yeah, that's just, we all know that's bogus. So no, that's not even worth a response. I mean, I have all kinds of theists and Christians and people in my hangouts and even moderating for me.
You got it. I was surprised. I was like, I don't know if that's true, but we'll ask it.
Well, it's amazing what people say about me with lack of evidence. This is why I always ask them, if you're going to talk personal things about me rather than the arguments, you better present arguments real fast, or they will end up getting blocked 90% of the time. And do you know how many people have ever presented evidence that I've lied about anything? None. None. Or I'm fundamentally wrong. None. Or that the literature says I'm wrong. None. You claimed you had a dog and you lied about it earlier. It's out right here. It's not mine, but there's a dog right here. But you know, it's funny is I do go out of my way to present a lot of citations, and people have actually called that a fallacy. They've actually said that's an argument from authority fallacy, which is not. Okay, it's just called citations. It'd be an argument from authorities saying, "Hey, look, these experts say I'm right, therefore I'm right." That would be a fallacy, and nobody would ever do that, I would think. So when I ask people for citations, you're saying, you know, this is the case. What is your support for this in the academic publications, right? You think they would have something, but they have nothing. Absolutely nothing. Why is that?
You got it. Thanks for that question. And we'll do a couple more. We got Sock Account asked, can we get clarification on the following definitions as well? evidence and God?
Evidence is typically a body of facts known to be true. And God is defined differently depending on the person making the claim of a God. And I don't make any of those claims, so I don't have a definition for one.
I'll give it a shot. Evidence, there's two forms of evidence. There's actually many different forms of evidence, actually, testimonial and a lot of it legal forms. But evidence is either going to be what is submitted to be evaluated in an argument, right? I'm saying, hey, here's my evidence, evaluate it, right? It could be bad, could be good, but it's still something to be evidence. It's something submitted. In science, evidence is what more likely changes the likelihood of a hypothesis to be true. Okay, so there's actual scientific evidence, what's considered to be evidence. Is it a body of facts? Yes, of course. But it's also those facts that are saying that my hypothesis is the more likely the case over the null hypothesis or somebody else's hypothesis, right?
I forgot that part of my definition. Thank you.
No problem. And then God, most people just use a very basal definitions of God, right? If you don't have a working definition of God over thousands of years of discourse, I don't know why you're bothering with these conversations, right? But basically God is presented as some kind of omnipotent type being, or at least all-knowing being, or all-powerful being, or at least to some extent comparison to us, right? Whether it's an infinite amount of omnipotence or whatever, it's still beyond our abilities, that has created the universe, created the world, created us. That's how it's generally promoted, right? You can get some stipulative things in that, but I think that anybody who says they hear the word God, they don't have something come to mind, I find to be questionable. I think we all have something that comes to our mind when we hear that term God. It's going to be different from person to person. That's fine. They're stipulative. These are not prescriptive by any means. They're just for conversational purposes. But I think that at least we have an idea what we're talking about. Like porn, like the justice system said, hey, I can't define porn, but I know it when I see it, kind of thing.
Unless it's crush porn.
I don't know what that is, but it sounds perverted.
It's people walking on food.
Oh, no shit. That's a real thing.
That's a real thing.
We can talk
and it's
about
on YouTube because it's not against their guidelines.
Do you realize you have food? You have food in back of you, so are you into that? I don't judge.
We can talk about your personal life later, Jared. Okay?
Yeah, this is gonna be a whole different show.
Let's see. Next question, and probably our last one. This is from Candor Man. Thanks for your question. He said, unless you asked it already, can you ask Steve if rocks are or are not carnivores?
They're not carnivores. They can't eat meat.
You got it.
I don't know why that would be a relevant question.
Next, and that is what we have for questions. We really appreciate your questions. This has been a blast, as always.
This was fun.
I enjoyed it.
I had a good time. Thank you.
Me too. I think my hope is that the kind of one of the philosophies of the channel is that people can disagree. They can disagree strongly, and they can say like, yeah, but like, don't let it bother us. So I think that the speakers we have today are like experts at that, in that they've just shown that so well in all their debates. They're like, yeah, like let's go.
Yeah, I like the way he presented this. Obviously, he has some kind of conversational skills. He may not be well read on the philosophical stuff, but that, you know what, I think that he might want to be now. I think he knows how to have a dialogue, which is, compared to the debate that I had last time on this topic, I mean, it's apples and oranges. So I want to thank you, Patient Beard, for that. I'm very, very grateful that we had an actual discussion rather than what you see out there. Some people, I still have trolls in the live chat too, kind of thing. They're always going to be out there saying, look, at Steve doesn't always talk about it, he's wrong, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And all you got to do is ask them why, and ask them for any citational things that back up their things. They just won't. They'll come up with every excuse. Well, why do I need any citations? Well, we're having a discussion here about how things are in academia. You might want to bring something to the table, is my opinion. Right. So, but I'm glad that you're willing to maybe change your positions a little bit and not think that my positions are so abominable, because that's what the ACA and AA and AR had put out for a very long time. Steve's a crackpot, blah, blah, blah. But more and more people I found out are actually calling them, and more and more people behind the scenes are going, you know what, you probably need to tone it back a little bit because you're looking kind of foolish. Because the people that do know about these topics are very supportive of me on it. In fact, one person, if I can say it, one person actually liked my materials so much. He's a mathematician. He loved my one of my videos I did on the Taylor series. Said it was better than some of his grad students. But he liked my work so much, he actually paid for Sweet Heathen to be flying out here so we can have a get-together. So thank you for the people that do support me. I do acknowledge it, and I'm humbled that I have Patreons and I have people watch the channel that do go and look at these things. And thank you. So I got a date out of all this because I believe the way I do.
That's beautiful. And SJ just shot in a quick question. She said, "Pumpkin atheist." James, can you ask Steve to elaborate on the newest group of atheists on Twitter, namely Pumpkin Atheists?
Well, she already has her answer to this. People have already explained to her. Pumpkin atheism is because of the new International Fundamental Baptist Church.
McMurtry.
McMurtry and Stephen Anderson. And basically, they're an organization that promotes that if you're gay or part of the LGBT or whatever, you should kill yourself or to be hung, or you should basically be executed by the government. They use the term pumpkin to describe Mr. Atheist as, some kind of fruit thing. That devolved in some other type of things. But the principle behind it is that if you are against that narrative, you're against organizations that think that homosexuality is wrong or they should be killed, you put a pumpkin on, your Twitter thing, which, I just recently did because Ocean said, hey, you need a pumpkin. And I was like, I'll become your cult. Why not? Because I do support that. I do support the people going after these organizations. I'm all for free speech and for all for free ideas, but these people are advocating violence. They're advocating hatred. They're disgusting. They're vile. I think that if you can shut them down, it's not that you're shutting down their speech. You're shutting down the effectiveness for them to cause actual damage to people that, can commit suicide or be distraught by this narrative that you think that they should die. I'm okay with shutting that type of speech down. And I'm pretty free speech, right? But you're advocating violence because I think that what you say is violent, and so they're going after their PayPal because I think they're violating terms of service because they promote hate speech, and people are asking for their PayPals to be shut down. I'm okay with that.
I just call them the Gourd Horde.
You got it. Well,
that's that. So
appreciate
people.
you.
Let me know if people agree on that. That we should shut down that kind of organization because I'm in the position that I think that it's okay. I think it's morally justified to do so.
I agree. I'm against violence, inciting violence. That's not cool.
Yeah.
You bet. Thanks for filling me in. I had seen a lot of pumpkins, but I wasn't fully sure what the meaning. So that gives me more details. And with that, we want to say thanks for being here, everybody. It has been a total blast with these two gentlemen who are, as you'll recall, linked in the description in case you're like, I want to see more. And if you would like to help support us at the channel, one thing that you can do that really helps in a real concrete way is give us a thumbs up or a share. That just basically lets YouTube know that people are engaging with the video, that if you actually enjoyed it, go ahead, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't enjoy it, give it a thumbs down. That's all right. So if you have feedback, let us know. We're always open to feedback. This channel is honestly built on the proverbial back of everyone's good ideas. This is basically everybody's ideas except mine. I just shoot out emails and fumble with Streamlabs. So thanks so much. We appreciate you being here. And with that, we want to wish you well and keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable. Take care.